Bastards of the Party. Bastards of the Party. I like this movie because it's one of the few sources that really discusses the origins of the Black Panther Party in Los Angeles. It's also very useful for this unit we're in right now on groups. I think that in our class discussion, we can easily bring out a lot of the elements of the sociology of groups in this movie. So in this, I'm going to just give a very short presentation of some of my thoughts on other aspects of the movie that perhaps you might not have thought about. I thought that this movie was 90% really great at presenting the history of the Black Panther chapter in Los Angeles and the origins of gangs in Los Angeles. 90% great. 10% I thought was vindicationist. Now, vindicationist is a term that we use to describe people's representations of history that is designed to show themselves in the best light, or to show their ancestors or their people in the best light. So vindicationist history is usually not the most accurate because it's designed to present something in a positive light. And there are some elements of this in the movie that I wanted to bring out. Probably the most extreme example was Erica Huggins. She was a sort of a middle-aged woman with very short hair, and who was a member of the Black Panther chapter in Los Angeles. And her husband was killed in the shootout on the UCLA campus between the Panthers and the US organization. And in the film, she says, "We weren't thugs; we were just members of the community," or something like that. In fact, Erica was up to her eyeballs in some very unsavory stuff. In New Haven, Connecticut, she participated in the torture and interrogation of a Black Panther Party member who was suspected of being an informant. He was tortured and interrogated for 2 full days. Finally, he made a false confession just to make the torture stop, and then 3 Panthers murdered him. Erica was put on trial for participating, and the charges were dismissed by the judge because the jury could not reach a verdict. It was a hung jury, and the judge felt that it was going to be impossible to get an unbiased jury in this highly politicized situation. However, there's no question that Ms. Huggins was involved in the interrogation. There are tape recordings of her participation. Apparently, she even boiled water so they could pour the water on the victim. And if you're interested, you can hear the tape of the interrogation on YouTube. So when she says we were just members of the community, not thugs, this is a clear example of vindicationist history. The other aspect that I thought was interesting of vindicationism was in the description of how the gangs came to be in Los Angeles. And it was presented as a defense mechanism against white racist gangs. They mentioned the white racist gang called the Spook Hunters, who supposedly was chasing young African American men and beating them. I have no doubt that this happened. I have no doubt that protection from other gangs was a factor. But as sociologists, we want to expand our focus. Now, in every large urban metropolitan area across the world, there are gangs. This seems to be a feature of cities in general. So it would be a mistake to look for things that are particular to Los Angeles to explain the existence of gangs. There are going to be youth gangs in any large city of this situation. And the youth, especially the more inequality you get, the more likely you are to find youth gangs in the most disadvantaged neighborhoods. And for a variety of reasons, people who study gangs find that they perform certain functions for the young men who join them. They provide the young men with access to recreation, access to income, even if it is criminal income, it's access to income that they might not have otherwise, access to women, access to status in their community. For some young men, it's a substitute family. And protection from other gangs is one of the functions. So you don't have to look for specific stories about spook hunters to explain the rise of gangs. Gangs are going to be there no matter what. Okay, so to say that is not to deny that spook hunters were a real thing, or that these young men really, I'm not arguing that these young men really did not need protection. Clearly they did. That's one of the main reasons that gangs form. But in trying to blame the rise of the gangs on white supremacy is to take our understanding of gangs out of context. White supremacy was a real thing, but gangs exist even in cities where there is no white supremacy. It's just a function of large urban areas. So to blame it on white supremacy is this element of vindication, and it's the implication is that we would not have gangs if it weren't for the spook hunters. Well, no, there would have been gangs no matter what. The film did not really get into the distinctions of who is fighting whom. I mean, most of us think it's the Crips versus the Bloods, and the film did nothing to dispel that. In fact, the situation is more complex, and you'll have the Crips and the Bloods are just the two largest groups, but they will fight each other. Members of Crip sets will fight other Crip sets. Blood sets will fight other Blood sets. Sometimes members of Crips and Blood sets will come together to fight a third party. It's not that simple to just to divide it into two groups. It's mainly divided along neighborhoods and smaller groupings. That was not really brought out completely in the film, although you did see a lot of emphasis on the role of the neighborhood, and especially Athens Park, where the filmmaker was from. One other element of vindicationism was the discussion on the shootout on the UCLA campus. The filmmakers seem to be attempting to blame the FBI for the shootout. Now, there is no excuse for the FBI's behavior. The FBI exacerbated tensions between the two groups, and it was unconscionable and probably almost certainly illegal what the FBI did. The law enforcement should not be involved in riling up gangs that are violent. That said, the FBI did not create the violence. These were pre-existing violent gangs. They already had been engaging in retaliatory assassinations. The FBI was not responsible for the violence. Again, violence between youth gangs is ubiquitous across all large major urban metropolitan areas. The FBI behaved irresponsibly, but it did not cause the violence. The most interesting thing to me here is the relationship between the pre-existing gangs and the formation of the Black Panther Party. So in the sociology of leadership, we note that there are several different types of leaders. For example, a bureaucratic leader would be like the President of the United States. It's a position that exists, you get voted into it, and the powers and the rules regarding who gets to be president and what you get to do as president, it's all written into law and regulation. That's a bureaucratic leader. Gangs, however, are led by what we call charismatic leaders, people who are chosen because of their personal characteristics. And the documentary described Alfonso Bunchy Carter, who was the leader of the Slauson gang in the late 1960s. Bunchy Carter becomes politicized. He gets to know some of the Black Panther Party members up in Oakland, and he becomes recruited into the party. And he begins to politicize his own gang members. And so now what you have is a criminal gang, the Slausons, who are also the Black Panther Party, simultaneously. Two separate things. Or, well, two different things, a political party, a revolutionary political party, and a criminal gang simultaneously. So on the one hand, they're doing their political activity. On the other hand, they're continuing with their criminal gang activity. And it's very difficult to divide the line between those. It was a similar thing up in Oakland, where the Black Panther Party in Oakland did not emerge out of a criminal gang, but it functioned as a criminal gang. The party in Oakland had one wing that was involved in doing armed robberies, extortion. So they had their criminal side, then they had their political side, and then they also had their social service side. And the documentary film touched on this. They had various social welfare organizations. For example, they had school for children. They had the free breakfast program. Well, where did they get the food for the free breakfast program? They extorted it from Black business owners. They basically took it by force. How did the school get funded? Well, they wrote grants to state government agencies and other grant funding agencies. And recall in the documentary that the filmmaker talked about poverty pimps, people who started anti-poverty programs, got grants, but then skimmed most of the money off for themselves. Well, that's what happened in Oakland. Yeah, they had a school for children, but most of the grant money went to support the leadership who lived in penthouses and drove Mercedes. And eventually, the party fell apart because of the embezzlement. The party leaders were charged with embezzlement. So the Black Panther Party is a very interesting combination of both criminal gang on one hand, social service organization, and then political party. And in some sense, the gang members would use politics to justify their crimes. Now, not everybody who was involved in the Black Panther Party was a gang member. There were some people who were there simply because they believed in the social service program, or simply because they believed in the politics. So you have this very interesting combination of people and combination of missions mixed into one social organization. So I chose this film because it illustrates a lot of interesting things about groups, and also it's just a fascinating history about how the Black Panther Party in Los Angeles emerges from a criminal gang, coexists within a criminal gang, and then eventually, as the politics and the party dissipates, the criminal gang transforms into the Crips and just keeps on going until today. One thing that was not brought out in the film was what is different about Los Angeles. Now, I mentioned that there are criminal gangs in all cities. Yeah, but in U.S., the gangs in Los Angeles and Chicago are different. And what's different is that they are highly evolved, organized crime syndicates. They're organized. It's organized crime, primarily involved in drug dealing. And so there are mechanisms for reducing gang activity, and it works in most cities where gangs are just young men who need the gang for one of the reasons I mentioned earlier. Now, so in most cities, we can reduce a gang activity by giving these young men options. And in criminal justice, this method of reducing gang activity is called pulling the levers. And usually what happens is we bring all the gang members into a room. The police are there, social workers are there, and there are carrots and sticks. The police are sending the message that we know who you are. If you keep on doing what you're doing, your life is not going to go well. You're going to wind up in prison, or you're going to wind up dead. That's the stick. The carrot is we have at the same time social workers in the room who say, I can help you get hooked up with a job, get you back into education. I can help make your life better. And in most cities, these kinds of pulling the levers programs can have some degree of effectiveness in reducing gang activity. That is less likely to happen in Chicago and Los Angeles because there is so much money involved in drug dealing, and these are organized crime enterprises, not just gangs. This is one reason why there are so many more gang-related murders in these two cities. And this is why the mission of the filmmaker is probably not going to work in Los Angeles. He was able to mature and get some self-reflection and to walk away from gangs, and he's trying to help other young men, and he might be able to help some young men, but as long as there is an illegal drug organized crime enterprise going on, there is simply too much money at stake. The Crips and the Bloods in Los Angeles are not going to go away anytime in the near future.